the role that you play in the caucuses and the run-up to it is the most empowered and vital role that we give to any citizens in America. Iowa gets to define the debate. Iowa gets to force candidates to talk about things that they will not talk about for the rest of the campaign. And as good as you are, and as a Wisconsinite, this is hard for me to say, as good as you are is as good as America is. If you do your job, this country has tremendous potential to end wars, to really end wars, not to talk about it, not to, bring a war down a little bit and then bring it back up next week. We're going to be talking about another authorization of the use of force. We get in, we get out. No. To actually talk about a new foreign policy, yes, my friend from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, to talk about a new foreign policy that actually says we don't have to always be at war. We do not have to police the world. Maybe we can be at peace with the world. Brothers and sisters, this is possible reality, but it doesn't happen unless Iowa does its job. Nice thing about Iowa is they don't seem to like wars very much. That's a good thing. That is a real good thing. Star Pack, where's Chet? Chet's over there, Iowans actually do and have intervened over a period of time. This event is co-sponsored by the Communication Workers of America locals here in Iowa, and I want to bring that up as a special note because for a long time we've had this struggle with the labor community. We got a lot of labor folks who say, we really don't like money in politics except our money in politics. And I understand that, and so you got to defend yourself. But one of the things that CWA and a few other unions have stepped up to recognize is that if you want to get good conditions for workers in America, you better get good conditions for democracy in America, because the fact of the matter is the billionaires got a lot more money than the workers. And we are seeing labor unions step up to become more and more involved in core democracy issues. And I celebrate CWA. I think it's the Labor Fed is in, and some of these other groups. So glad they are here talking about governing under the influence, because workers got to be a part of this. They can't think that they're going to be able to figure out a way out of this without all the rest of us. And peace groups got to be a part of this, because there's not a way out of this without the rest of us. Environmentalists got to be a part of this, because we're not going to address global warming unless we address these democracy challenges. Every issue that you care about, I want it to remain your number one issue. But your number two issue's got to be money in politics, because you're not going to get your number one unless you solve the number two. Get good at it, and then get good at how money is influencing it. Get good at why the things that the American people want, they're not getting. Be good at talking about that. Know your issue, know the role of the money, and then you walk into that living room. You walk into that church basement. You walk into that union hall. You walk into wherever a candidate is coming to Iowa, and you say, I want to talk about food. I want to talk about farming. I want to talk about war and peace. I want to talk about the condition of workers. I want to talk about racial justice. And I want to talk about who's giving you money that makes you such a lousy person as regards these issues. When you go to those caucuses, when you cast those ballots, understand this. If African Americans could not have voted in 2012 and 2008, then Mitt Romney or John McCain would have been elected president. African American vote, margin of error. But the interesting thing happened in the Civil War. When the Civil War produced a constitutional amendment to open up the franchise, some other people sort of stand around and they go, hold it. You can amend the Constitution and become, fully part of this thing? As a woman, I'm kind of feeling like maybe that's a good idea. And so women who had been organizing before the Civil War, Seneca Falls, all these, women started to say, hey, I want to be a part of this thing. And they started to think, okay, I'd like to see that constitutional amendment that extends voting rights to women. And so the 20th century, understood in a democracy sense, is a period of a lot of people coming in, laws being changed, democracy being extended. This country recognized in the language of Franklin Roosevelt and Wendell Willkie, his Republican opponent, that we didn't fight World War II to come home to a country where democracy was not fully realized. This idea that we had to open those doors, we had to bring people in. And this is an ancient history. Several people in this room remember the 1960s. Not all of you, I understand, but several people here. 1964, when we amended the Constitution of the United States to say that there could not be a wealth barrier to voting in this country. Not ancient history, in the lifetime of many people in this room. And you know what happened as we eliminated the poll tax? Again, with a constitutional amendment. What happened is we eliminated the poll tax with the constitutional amendment. Right along the way, we're getting Civil Rights Act. We're getting Voting Rights Act. We're starting to realize that promise of that previous constitutional amendment 100 years before, and saying that people of color, African Americans, must have a fully realized right to vote. It must be protected. And by Lord, if we've got to have a Voting Rights Act and we've got to enforce it in some places, we will enforce it, and we will go there because democracy itself is so important, you can't deny the franchise to any human being. Really cool. Women are voting. We're making sure poor people vote. People of color are getting a right. Everything's. But you see, you're sending us to Vietnam, and we can't vote on wars. And so they amended the Constitution of the United States to say that 18 to 21-year-olds had a right to vote on whether they got sent off to war. That's democracy rising. In your lifetimes, people who were running for office in Iowa were talking about $300, or maybe even for governor of the state in a highly competitive race. Maybe they were getting into the thousands. Now they're talking about the tens of millions. And what do those tens of millions do? They buy influence. That's a reality. But they do something else, because I actually believe there are honorable politicians. And I actually believe there are citizens who see through the lies. So if you got honorable politicians and you got citizens who see through the lies, what do? You make politics so horrifying, so awful, that people just turn away from it. You had the most exciting, significant Senate race in America last year, and yet a huge portion of Iowans didn't even go to the polls. Massive numbers of people, smart people, your neighbors, did not go to the polls. Why would they do that? What's wrong with them? You sent your sons and your brothers and your fathers to die in the Civil War to make real the promise of democracy. Your grandmothers, your great-grandmothers, they marched and struggled and starved to get women's rights. Your sons, your brothers, they fought for the right to vote as 18 to 21-year-olds. You know the meaning of democracy. You know the value of democracy. Why did people not vote? Well, I can tell you. They watch television. And if you watch television in this era where our news is dumbed down, where our beautiful newspapers have been, culled out and made thin, I like a newspaper that breaks the steps in front of my house when it hits it. Big, thick newspaper. Now I got, they're so thin. I can still find my horoscope, but newspapers are not what they were. In fact, our news industry has been transformed so that we're not getting our information from news anymore. Do you know what? In Senate races in the country today, roughly 90, in some states, key states, roughly 90% of the ads, sometimes even more, you know what they say? Don't vote. Now, they don't actually say it directly that way. It's a dialectic, right? You add to one another. So you say, don't vote for her. Okay, I got that, check. They say, and don't vote for her opponent. Okay, got that, check. Well, who should I vote for? Nobody, right? It makes sense. If you are inundated with tens of millions of dollars telling you not to vote, a lot of you won't vote. We have to say that we're going to talk about that money. We're going to go to those meetings. We're going to bird dog those candidates. We're going to stand up in our caucuses. We are going to say that our politicians of both parties are governing under the influence, and if you can't drive under the influence, you shouldn't be able to govern under the influence. And brothers and sisters, if we're going to ask them a question, then why don't we ask them if they think money is speech? Why don't we ask them to say to our faces that they think corporations are people, my friend? Why don't we ask them to say whether they think we, the people, have a right to organize elections in which our votes matter more than the Koch brothers' dollars? Why not ask them that to their face? Do it politely because you're Iowans, but why not ask them that? I'm a Wisconsinite. We're polite too. But why not ask them that? And if they dance around it, and if they try to give you all sorts of explanations and all sorts of excuses, why not say, I don't think you've answered my question. And if at the end of that conversation, they are not willing to give you your democracy back, then maybe it's time to say, I am not willing to give you my vote. Because brothers and sisters, it's a very simple equation. We're going to have to amend our Constitution. We had to amend our Constitution after the Civil War. We had to amend our Constitution to get votes for women. We had to amend our Constitution to end the poll tax. We had to amend our Constitution to say that 18 to 21-year-olds have a right to vote again and again and again in American history in harder times than these, against greater barriers than we face. We have had to amend our Constitution to make real the promise of American democracy. And so it is appropriate for us to say that the time has come, Mr. Candidate, Miss Candidate, for you to go on the record. Are you with us to amend the Constitution once more on behalf of democracy? Are you willing to say, money is not speech? Corporations are not people. And we have a right to organize elections in which our votes matter more than their dollars. If you're not with us on that, how can we trust you on anything else? Because, brothers and sisters, we don't want a government that is under the influence. We want a government that is of, by, and for the people. Thank you.